10 plagues, 10 divine judgments, 10 steps in the systematic dismantling of the most powerful civilization on Earth. The story of Exodus is one of the most famous legends in human history. A story of a stubborn pharaoh, a defiant prophet, and a God who would stop at nothing to free his people. For millennia, the world has viewed this as a tale of sheer supernatural power, a story of magic, miracles, and a vengeful deity. But what if it wasn't? What if this wasn't 10 separate random attacks, but one? What if we're looking at a single catastrophic natural event that triggered an unstoppable cascading ecological collapse? A scientific domino effect where each plague was not an independent miracle, but a terrifying logical consequence of the one before it. Today, we are not just retelling a Bible story. We are opening a scientific case file. We are going to dragon hunter this myth and see if a plausible, natural explanation exists. We will rank these 10 disasters not by their biblical order, but by their sheer scientific horror. Which plague was the most psychologically terrifying? Which one was the most economically devastating? And which one, from a cold, logical perspective, represents the most horrifying and brilliant natural disaster of all time? This is the scientific ranking of the 10 plagues of Egypt. The answers will change the way you see this story forever.
Before we can rank the plagues, we must understand Egypt. Egypt is the Nile. The historian Herodotus famously said, "Egypt is the gift of the Nile." It was their god, their highway, their food source, their everything. All life, all power, all wealth flowed from this one river. And the first plague, the event that starts the entire domino chain, is aimed directly at this heart. Plague 1. The water turns to blood. Exodus 7. The story is terrifying. Moses strikes the Nile and the river transforms into blood. The water becomes undrinkable, the fish die, and the river stinks. This is not a supernatural fantasy. This is a known modern ecological disaster. Scientists call it a red tide, or more specifically, a red algal bloom. Imagine this, a sudden, dramatic shift in climate, a prolonged drought followed by sluggish, warm waters. This creates the perfect breeding ground for a specific type of freshwater algae, a cyanobacteria called Oscillatoria rubescens, also known as blood algae. When these bacteria bloom in massive quantities, they release a powerful reddish-brown pigment that stains the water, making it look exactly like blood. But the color is the least of the problems. These algae also release a potent toxin, a hepatotoxin, that is lethal to fish and mammals. The water becomes a deoxygenated, toxic soup. The horror ranking high, ecological catastrophe. This isn't just an ugly spectacle. This is the Linchpin plague. By killing the fish, it removes a primary food source. By poisoning the water, it makes sanitation, hygiene, and survival impossible. And most importantly, by driving all aquatic life out of the river, it directly triggers the second plague. The first domino has fallen.
Plague 2. The frogs. Exodus 8.
The Bible says a horde of frogs came from the river and covered the land, infesting every home. This isn't an invasion, it's an evacuation. Amphibians are environmental barometers. Their skin is permeable. They cannot survive in the toxic, deoxygenated blood water from plague number 1. They are forced to flee en masse to the only other moist places they can find: the cool, damp, mud brick Egyptian homes. But here's the second part of the horror. Without a clean water source, the frogs, now on land, die. All of them. The Bible says the Egyptians gathered them together in heaps and the land stank. The horror ranking: severe, psychological, and biological hazard. This is a multi-layered horror. First, the psychological terror of a slimy invasion. But the real disaster is the smell. The unbelievable, overwhelming stench of millions of rotting frog carcasses piled up in the streets, in the fields, in their homes. This isn't just unpleasant, it's a biological hazard, creating the single greatest breeding ground for insects in the nation's history. The second domino has struck the third.
The stage is set for a biological explosion. With the Nile dead, the natural ecosystem is broken. The fish and frogs, which normally keep the insect population in check, are gone. In their place are millions of tons of rotting carrion. It's an open buffet. Plague 3, the gnats, or lice, Exodus 8. The Bible says the dust of the earth became gnats, or lice, that swarmed man and beast. This is the first wave of insects. The rotting, damp environment is perfect for the Culicoides midge, a tiny biting insect often called a no-see-um. They breed in the mud and decaying organic matter. Their swarms are so thick they look like clouds of dust. The horror ranking: maddening, psychological torture. This is the horror of inescapable irritation. You can't see them, but you can feel them. Thousands of tiny, sharp bites. They are in your eyes, your nose, your mouth. You cannot sleep. You cannot eat. You cannot think. Even Pharaoh's magicians who could replicate the previous tricks are defeated. They can't fake this. This is pure, maddening, psychological torture.
Plague 4, the flies, Exodus 8. As if the gnats weren't enough, a second, more terrifying wave of insects arrives, a grievous swarm of flies. This is likely the stable fly, or Stomoxys calcitrans. Unlike a common housefly, the Stomoxys has a piercing proboscis and feeds on blood. They are vicious biters. And just like the gnats, they are breeding unchecked in the millions of rotting carcasses, frogs, fish that now litter Egypt. The horror-ranking escalation, physical and medical threat. The horror has now escalated. This isn't just an annoyance. This is an assault. The biting is painful and relentless, but the real terror is what the flies carry. These swarms are the perfect vector for disease, flying from a rotting carcass to an open wound, from a dead animal to a living one. They are a flying, buzzing biological weapon, and they are about to unleash the next plague. The Bible notes that the flies did not appear in Goshen, the land of the Hebrews. This is scientifically plausible. Goshen was a separate delta region, possibly with different water sources or a geography that protected it from the initial algal bloom's worst effects, breaking the ecological chain at its source.
The disaster has now moved from psychology to biology. The next 2 plagues are a direct consequence of the disease-carrying insects. Plague 5, the pestilence of livestock, Exodus 9. A grievous pestilence strikes all the livestock of Egypt. Their horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, and sheep die en masse. The livestock of the Hebrews in Goshen is untouched. This is a classic epizootic, a fast-spreading animal pandemic. The biting flies from Plague 4 are the perfect delivery system. They could have been carrying any number of viruses, like African horse sickness or blue tongue virus, which are devastating to livestock. The death would be swift and total. The horror ranking: catastrophic, economic, and military ruin. This plague is not just sad, it's a civilization killer. In one stroke, Egypt's entire economy is gone. Their food source dead, cattle, sheep. Their labor force dead, oxen for plowing. Their transportation dead, donkeys, camels. Their military supremacy dead, the horses for their chariots. Pharaoh's war machine is now just a collection of grounded, useless wooden carts. This is total economic and military collapse. Plague 6, the boils. The nightmare finds a new host. The Bible says Moses threw soot into the air, and it became fine dust that caused festering boils on all the people and animals of Egypt. The disease has now made the leap from animals to humans, a zoonotic origin pandemic. The soot could be a symbolic act, but the biological vector is already in place. One chillingly plausible theory is glanders. It's a disease primarily affecting horses, Plague 5, that can be transmitted to humans. It causes painful lung lesions and, in its cutaneous form, hideous erupting skin ulcers, a perfect description of boils. Another theory points back to the flies. The Stalmoxis flies are still swarming, and now they are biting humans, transmitting a bacterium like Staphylococcus aureus from the rotting livestock to the already weakened, unhygienic human population, causing rampant, severe skin infections. The horror ranking: abject misery, personal and societal breakdown. The horror is now personal. It's not just your river or your animals, it's your skin. The entire nation is in agonizing, suppurating pain. Society would grind to a halt. There is no workforce, no army, only a nation of the sick, scratching at their open sores, dying from secondary infections. This is the horror of total societal breakdown.
Egypt is broken. Its ecosystem is dead. Its economy is in ruins, and its people are diseased. The biological domino effect is complete. But the assault is not over. The next plagues are of a different kind. They are not biological. They are geological and meteorological. What could cause such a violent shift? Many scientists point to one of the largest natural disasters in human history, an event that happened at roughly the same time. The colossal Bronze Age eruption of the Thera volcano on the island of Santorini. This is our dragon. A real, datable event that could have provided the scientific basis for the final, most apocalyptic plagues. Plague 7. The thunder, hail, and fire. Exodus 9. The Bible describes the most violent storm imaginable. A storm of hail and fire so severe it shattered trees and destroyed the last of the crops, flax and barley, that were in the field. This is a textbook description of a volcanic thunderstorm. When a massive volcanic plume, billions of tons of ash, ice, and rock, is ejected 40 kilometers into the atmosphere, it creates its own weather system.
The friction between the ash particles generates an enormous amount of static electricity, resulting in a continuous, terrifying lightning storm within the ash cloud. The ice crystals formed at high altitude fall as massive hailstones. The fire mixed with the hail, that's the lightning. A perfect, terrifyingly accurate description from a pre-scientific witness. The horror ranking, apocalyptic, shock and awe. This is the horror of the sky itself falling. It's not just rain, it's ice bullets and divine fire. It shatters what little infrastructure is left. It's pure, apocalyptic terror, a sign that the gods themselves, or in this case, the planet, have declared war.
Plague 8, the Locusts, Exodus 10. After the hail, Pharaoh almost breaks, but he hardens his heart one more time, and so the next plague comes. A wind from the east brings an unprecedented swarm of locusts. The Bible says they covered the face of the whole earth so that the land was darkened. This is a direct domino from Plague 7. The Thera eruption's ash cloud would have caused climate chaos across the entire region. The ashfall would have destroyed crops in neighboring lands, and the atmospheric changes would have triggered unusual wind patterns. This creates the perfect conditions for a super swarm. A massive population of desert locusts, their own food source destroyed by the volcanic fallout, would be driven by the new wind patterns to migrate to the one fertile place left in the region, the Nile Valley. The hail destroyed the first harvest. The locusts have come to eat the second, the wheat and spelt, and anything else that survived. The horror ranking. Absolute despair. The end of food. If the livestock plague was economic ruin, this is the final nail in the coffin. This is the horror of total starvation. There is nothing left. The hail destroyed the crops. The locusts ate the leaves, the bark, the very hope of a future. Egypt, a nation of farmers, now has zero food.
Plague 9, the darkness. Exodus 10. The ninth plague is perhaps the most primal. A thick darkness descends upon Egypt for 3 days. A darkness so profound, the Bible says it could be felt. People could not see one another, and no one left their place for 3 days. The scientific case file. This is the most direct and scientifically accepted link to the Thera eruption. This is the main pyroclastic ash cloud. As the volcanic plume traveled across the Mediterranean, it would have rained fine, gritty, sulfuric ash over Egypt. This is not the simple absence of light. It's a darkness that can be felt because it's physical. It's a choking, blinding cloud of grit. It blocks the sun completely. It fills the lungs, stings the eyes, and extinguishes fires by choking them of oxygen. The horror ranking. Primal terror. The death of the sun. This is the horror of the world ending. The sun, their chief god Ra, has been blotted out. For 3 days, there is no day. There is only a cold, suffocating, terrifying blackness. The psychological trauma would be unimaginable. It is the single most powerful demonstration of power. Even the sun, the very source of life, can be extinguished.
This is it. The one most horrifying, most devastating, and most brilliant plague of all. The biological, psychological, and geological assaults are over. This final attack is a silent, invisible assassin. Plague 10.
The death of the firstborn. Exodus 12. At midnight, the angel of death passes through Egypt. One member of every household is struck down. The firstborn son, from the son of Pharaoh on his throne to the son of the slave girl at her mill. The firstborn of the animals also die. The only homes spared are those marked with the blood of a lamb on the doorposts. How could a natural disaster be so specific? How could it target only the firstborn? The answer is a chilling masterpiece of toxicology and cultural practice. The problem: the locusts, plague 8, and hail, plague 7, destroyed all the fresh food. The food source: the only food left in Egypt is the grain stored in silos and granaries, likely on the ground floor of homes. The contamination: Domino. This stored grain has been sitting for months. It has endured the dampness from the river's initial chaos, the infestations of insects, plagues 3 and 4, and now the humidity and darkness from the volcanic ash cloud, plague 9. This is the perfect environment for lethal mold to grow. The toxin: we're likely looking at a severe case of mycotoxicosis caused by a black mold like Stachybotrys growing on the grain. These molds produce toxins so potent they can cause massive hemorrhaging, fever, and death in hours. The firstborn connection, the masterstroke. Why the firstborn? In Egyptian culture, the firstborn son was the heir, the pride of the family. He and the most prized firstborn livestock received special privileges. This would include getting the first and largest portion of the food at mealtime. When the Egyptians, starving and in the dark, opened their contaminated grain stores, they unknowingly fed a lethal dose of poison, first to their firstborn sons. The angel of death wasn't a specter. It was a toxin that preyed on cultural tradition. Why were the Hebrews spared? This is the most brilliant part. Look at God's instructions to Moses for the Passover. Do not eat your normal food, i.e., don't eat the poisoned grain. Take a lamb and roast it over the fire, a safe, fresh protein source. Eat it with unleavened bread, matzah. Why unleavened bread? It's made in a hurry. It's made from fresh flour, with no time for yeast to rise. Critically, it doesn't use a starter from the old, moldy, contaminated grain. The blood on the doorpost was the sign of obedience to this life-saving dietary command. By following these specific instructions, the Hebrews avoided the contaminated grain, and the angel of death passed over their homes. The horror ranking. Number 1. The invisible killer. This is, without question, the most horrifying plague. It's the horror of the invisible killer. It's the tragedy of a parent, in an act of love, poisoning their own child. It's the realization that your last refuge, your home, and your last meal have become your tomb. It's a perfect, silent, inescapable trap sprung by the previous 9 plagues. The reading voice slows down and deepens. It poses a final cautionary question for modern audiences. So, We've ranked the horrors. We've investigated the science. What's the final verdict on this 3,500-year-old case? Whether you believe this was a series of 10 supernatural miracles or a single 1 in a billion natural catastrophe, the story remains one of the most compelling accounts of civilizational collapse ever told. The domino effect theory doesn't disprove the story. In many ways, it makes it more terrifying. It grounds the myth in a chillingly plausible reality. It presents a world where the ecosystem is so fragile that a single event in the river can, 10 steps later, result in a highly specific plague that targets only the firstborn. Perhaps the miracle wasn't just the plagues themselves. Perhaps the miracle was the timing. The fact that these 10 specific events happened in this exact chronological order, escalating in severity, culminating in a final, precise horror that broke the will of a king. Is that a coincidence of natural chaos? Or is that the intricate, terrifying design of a power that commands nature itself? The story of the plagues is the ultimate cautionary tale. It's a reminder that any civilization, no matter how powerful, is only a few dominoes away from collapse. It forces us to ask, what is our Nile? What is the one thing we depend on so completely that its pollution would unravel our entire world?